Before we dive in, I want you to imagine a mirror. Not just any mirror, but one that's gilded with an ornate frame. The kind you'd find in a palace or maybe a celebrity's bathroom. At first glance, it's beautiful, but as you step closer, you notice something unsettling. The glass is cracked. No matter how perfect the frame looks, the reflection's distorted. What you see isn't reality, and trying to make sense of it can be frustrating and even painful. That is what narcissism is. It's a gilded, broken mirror showing a distorted view of the world. Now, what we're going to be doing in this video is we're going to be talking about those cracks. What are those cracks in the mirror and what do they mean? We'll explore 6 key themes to understand not just the what of narcissism, but also the why and how of its impact on all of us. We'll look at the deeper truths behind these cracks and get to the bottom of what makes a narcissist. So here's the roadmap for the lecture. First, we'll explore narcissism and entitlement, those two star players in this drama of modern life. Why do some people seem to believe the world owes them a round of applause just for showing up? And how do we get here? Spoiler alert, it's not all the millennials' fault. Next, we'll tackle the intergenerational responsibility, or what I like to call the it's not just your kid's problem. We'll unpack how entitlement and narcissism didn't just pop up overnight, they've actually been passed down in some aspects, wrapped up with the bows of self esteem campaigns and a few decades of cultural self indulgence. Then we'll venture into the emotional minefield of toxic relationships. These are the relationships that make you question your sanity, your self worth, and sometimes even your Wi Fi password when you're Googling how to deal with toxic people. After that, we're going to zoom into the bird's eye view of cultural and systemic reflection. If you've ever wondered why narcissism seems to be thriving in corporate boardrooms and on social media, this part of the lecture is for you. Again, a spoiler alert, it's not just because CEOs like the corner offices. From there, we'll dive into the paradox of pathology and success, why some traits that make people insufferable at home make them stars at work. And yes, narcissists can crush it on LinkedIn, but at what cost? And finally, we'll tackle the tough question of treatment challenges. Can narcissism be treated? Short answer is kind of. The long answer involves a lot of therapy, a lot of patience, and possibly a glass of wine afterwards. So grab your proverbial toolkit and let's start examining that broken mirror to see what we can do. By the end of this lecture, my hope is that you'll not only understand the cracks, but also learn how to avoid cutting yourself on them. So let's start with the star of the show. He always likes to be first, narcissism and entitlement. If narcissism were a movie character, it'd probably be the self-absorbed diva who doesn't just want the spotlight, they think they are the spotlight. And entitlement? That's the sidekick constantly whispering, hey, you deserve this, and you don't need to share. Together, these two create the first big crack in our metaphorical mirror. So, what exactly are we talking about here? Narcissism is more than just taking too many selfies or needing constant validation on social media, though those are synonymous and do present as symptoms. At its core, narcissism is about a sense of grandiosity. It's a lack of empathy and a deep, often hidden insecurity. People who are narcissistic want to be admired. They want to feel special, but the mirror they're holding up to themselves is cracked. They see a distorted image, and their quest for validation is an attempt to patch that reflection. It doesn't work. And why is this all such a big deal? Because entitlement, narcissism's trusty sidekick, steps in to magnify the problem. Entitlement's the belief that you deserve something without earning it. A little entitlement isn't always bad. People do have inherent worth and value. For instance, if you worked hard all week, you're entitled to binge your favorite Netflix show in sweatpants. There It's not for nothing. You put in the hours, you deserve the downtime. But when entitlement becomes excessive, it turns toxic, creating unreasonable expectations that others must cater to your needs. Here's where it gets tricky. Narcissism and entitlement don't develop in a vacuum. They're influenced by cultural messages, family dynamics, and societal shifts. Yeah, listen, back in the 1970s, we started telling kids they were special. And well, that had its merits. It also planted the seeds of unrealistic and distorted self perceptions. Imagine being told you're a superhero at 6, and by 36, you're confused why the world hasn't thrown you a ticker tape parade. That's the crack we're dealing with. So, what happens when this mirror breaks? Looking at some real world examples, take the Harvey Weinstein case. He was finally exposed for his decades of abuse. His primary concern wasn't the people he harmed, it was finding out who did him in. That's entitlement in action. The belief that the world should continue to revolve around you no matter what. Similarly, what we're seeing coming out of England in terms of these grooming gangs and the massive, massive foul up that MPs and police chiefs just more than just dropped the ball. They wanted to ignore the problem because they wanted the world, in some sense, to continue to revolve around the way they see things, as opposed to the way reality actually was. And a classic example of Bernie Madoff. After defrauding people out of $50 billion, this man was more concerned with getting his affairs in order than the financial devastation he caused thousands of families. These cases show the harm both narcissism and entitlement cause, not just to individuals, but to entire communities. They distort reality, turning other people into props or obstacles rather than equals, placing Hollywood profession, political ambition, money over other people. It's like trying to fix a cracked mirror by blaming the person looking at it. Now, part of the problem is cultural. As a society, we've created environments that nurture narcissism. Social media, for instance, is the breeding ground for validation seeking behaviors. Even percentage wise, the vast majority of people who are trolling, the snotty comments, the jerky pokes, are narcissists. And every like, comment, or share is also a hit of dopamine, reinforcing the idea that that person is the center of the universe. Now, it's no surprise that platforms like Instagram and TikTok feel like a hall of mirrors, a fun house that distorts reality, where everyone's reflection is exaggerated and polished, but no one can see the cracks. Moreover, success often rewards narcissistic behavior. Traits like confidence and assertiveness, which are hallmarks of narcissism, are also celebrated in professional contexts, even when they come at the expense of empathy and cooperation. It's as if society hands out rewards for the most elaborate frames around the most broken mirrors. Now, the good news is that understanding narcissism and entitlement helps us see the cracks more clearly. It starts with recognizing these behaviors in ourselves and others without immediately jumping to judgment. After all, narcissism often stems from deep insecurity. Imagine trying to live your life through a distorted reflection every day. And while we can't always fix these cracks in others, we can decide how much we let their broken mirrors affect our lives. Boundaries and empathy for yourself, just as much as for others, and an awareness of this problem are the Windex and duct tape of navigating narcissism. So as we move forward, keep that crack mirror in mind. Remember, it's not about smashing it because we all have our cracks. It's about learning how to live with them. And when necessary, being able to admit that there are some cracks bigger in other people and walking away from those folks, walking away from their distorted mirrors that devastate your sense of self-worth. Next, we're going to explore how these cracks didn't just appear overnight. In fact, some of them were handed down to us. Now that we looked at narcissism and entitlement, let's talk about where these cracks in the mirror come from, because they really don't just appear overnight, and they don't come from one single generation alone. If you've ever blamed millennials for taking too many selfies or Gen Z for TikTok dances, let me gently suggest we broaden our perspective. These cracks go back further, possibly to when someone handed a baby boomer the first disco ball and said, "You're the center of the universe." Let's start with a fun fact. Every generation likes to blame the next one for society's problems. Boomers were called the me generation back in the 1970s because they were seen as self-centered and focused on personal growth at the expense of community. Now, fast forward to today, and millennials are getting the same treatment with labels like entitled and lazy. But here's the kicker. Who raised those so-called entitled millennials? That's right, those boomers. The cracks in the mirror didn't start with millennials. They were handed down like heirlooms, cracks and all. It's tempting to play the blame game. Every generation loves to roll its eyes at the next, saying, "In my day, we worked harder and complained less." But blaming the younger generation for entitlement and narcissism is like blaming your reflection in a broken mirror for not looking perfect. The issue isn't the reflection, it's the cracks that have been there all along. So, how did these cracks form? One big contributor was the cultural shift in the 1970s and 80s, which put a huge emphasis on self-esteem. Back then, parents, teachers, society started telling kids, "You're special. You can do anything." And they meant it. But as Joel Stein points out in his work, this focus on self-esteem wasn't always tied to meaningful behaviors or achievement. It was like handing a kid a superhero cape and saying, "Hey man, you're amazing, just 'cause," without teaching them how to fly or even how to tie the cape on. The problem? By the time these kids grew up, they still believed they were superheroes. But life didn't hand out applause or just for them showing up. Now, cue frustration, unmet expectations, and a whole lot of participation trophies gathering dust in the attic. These kids were told that they had achieved, but they achieved nothing. One major fault was they trusted us. Now, I want to be clear. Entitlement isn't exclusive to millennials. Boomers, Gen X, Gen Z, and even the silent generation all have their own versions of this behavior. Baby boomers, for example, ushered in the era of self-focused consumerism, creating a culture where keeping up with the Joneses became a competitive sport. Gen X, often described as cynical, wasn't immune either. The generation embraced the me against the world mindset, which is exactly what self-centeredness is, just with an edge. Even the younger generations aren't starting from scratch. They're inheriting a world shaped by social media where validation is currency, and everyone's competing to look their best in that cracked mirror. In short, entitlement isn't a generational problem, it's a human problem. But why does each generation seem to pass down these cracks? The answer lies in cycles of cultural and economic change. For example, the self-esteem movement in the 1970s arose in part as a reaction to earlier generations' more rigid, authoritarian parenting. People wanted to empower their kids and help them avoid the struggles that they had faced. But telling someone they're special without tying it to meaningful actions only sets them up for disappointment when life doesn't cooperate. This pattern continues. Millennials, often criticized for being entitled, are now raising Gen Alpha kids. And yeah, some of them are already telling their toddlers they're amazing. It's like handing down the family mirror without fixing the cracks, hoping that maybe this time things will be different. Now, the good news is that just because we've inherited cracks in the mirror doesn't mean we can't start repairing them. First, we need to recognize that no generation is immune to entitlement. Pointing fingers won't help. It just reflects the cracks right back at us. Second, we need to connect self-worth to meaningful behaviors. You cannot just hand out self-worth like candy. Self-worth is tied to competence and success for real. Not enough to tell people they're special. We have to encourage them to act in ways that make them feel that way, but based on what they're doing. This doesn't mean abandoning self-esteem. It means anchoring it to real accomplishments and real resilience. And finally, we need to teach the next generation how to see the cracks without being defined by them. That means fostering empathy, accountability, and the ability to handle frustration. And each of these are extremely complicated. It's not enough just to be empathetic. The world's complicated. Everybody's got its side. It's not enough to be accountable. You're not alone. And there's a lot of things that we have to be accountable to, and some things are more important than others. After all, life's not always about fair, but it doesn't mean we're broken. We just have to adjust how we see ourselves in that mirror. So as we move to the next topic, toxic relationships, keep this in mind. We're all we all inherit cracks, but we also have the power to repair them. If each generation takes responsibility for its part in that bigger picture, we can make that mirror just a little clearer for the ones we hand that mirror down to. So far, we've talked about narcissism, entitlement, and how those cracks in the mirror are passed down from generation to generation. Now we're going to take a closer look at what happens when these cracks show up in our relationships. Because let's face it, nothing messes with your sense of self like dealing with someone who's toxic. Toxic relationships are like standing in front of a funhouse mirror. Not only is the reflection distorted, but the mirror actively makes you feel worse about yourself every time you look at it. It's exhausting, confusing, and unfortunately way more common than it should be. The term toxic relationship gets thrown around a lot, so let's define it. A toxic relationship is one where the behavior of one or both people in the relationship makes the other feel invalidated, insecure, just plain miserable. Toxicity doesn't always look like screaming matches or dramatic breakups. It can also be subtle, like passive aggressive comments, emotional manipulations, or the constant erosion of your confidence. Here's the kicker. Our natural inclination to forgive people and give them second chances often keeps these relationships alive. Well, let's be honest. How many of us have thought, well, maybe they're just having a bad day, or, well, they're not always like that. Toxic people, especially those with narcissistic traits, often use just enough charm or occasional kindness to keep you hooked. It's like being handed a broken mirror with a beautiful frame. It looks okay from the outside, but every time you use it, you end up feeling worse. Now, the damage from toxic relationships isn't just emotional, it's physical also. Research shows the poor social relationships can be as harmful to your health as smoking or obesity. A toxic relationship, they're the equivalent of smoking while eating a donut and skipping your workout. Now, think about it. When you're in a toxic relationship, you're constantly walking on eggshells, doubting yourself, questioning your self worth. It's a constant stressor, and chronic stress wreaks havoc on your body. Over time, it can lead to anxiety, depression, and even physical ailments like high blood pressure. It's not just bad for your heart metaphorically, it's bad for your actual heart. Now, let's circle back to narcissism for a second. Narcissists are often the kingpins of toxic relationships because their behavior revolves around their needs and their insecurities. They're like emotional vampires. They suck out your sense of security and leave you feeling like the problem. And because they're often charming or successful, calling them out is a risk and can even feel impossible. Here's an example. Imagine a colleague at work who takes credit for your ideas, dismisses your contributions, but occasionally praises you just enough to keep you second guessing. That's toxic. Another example. A partner who alternates between grand romantic gestures and cold detachment. That's toxic too. They invite you over for the holiday and then disinvite you a moment later. And then, I had a second thought. You can come back. I really love you. Narcissists are masters of creating just enough uncertainty to keep you stuck in the cycle. One of the biggest questions people ask is, why am I staying in this toxic relationship? The answer isn't simple. Sometimes it's about fear. You're afraid of confrontation. You fear losing the relationship. It actually gives you something. Fear of being alone. Other times it's about hope. Toxic people can be good at apologizing just enough or showing glimpses of kindness that might make you think maybe this time's going to be different. And let's not forget societal pressure. Toxic people are often successful or influential, which can make calling them out even harder. Remember all those MKs and police chiefs back in England right now? If someone's admired in their workplace, family, or community, you might feel like you're the one seeing the broken mirror while everyone else is praising the frame. So, how do we deal with toxic relationships? First, recognize the signs. Pay attention to how someone's behavior makes you feel, not just occasionally, but consistently. Do they leave you feeling drained, invalidated, or unsure of yourself? If the answer is yes, that's your red flag. Second, remember that you can't fix someone else's broken mirror. Toxic people often lack the self awareness or unwillingness to change, and you are in trouble if they lack both. Your job isn't to patch their cracks, it's to protect your own reflection. Now, that might mean setting boundaries, seeking support from trusted friends or professionals, and quite often, it does mean walking away. Now, finally, don't underestimate the power of removing a toxic person from your life. Once the initial shock wears off, most people feel a profound sense of relief. It's like stepping out of the fun house and seeing yourself clearly for the first time in ages. Now, toxic relationships, they teach us a lot, mainly what we don't deserve. They show us the cracks in other people's mirrors, but they also reveal our own. By recognizing these dynamics, we can start to reclaim our sense of self worth and surround ourselves with people who reflect the best in us, not the worst. Next, we're going to zoom out from the individual relationships and look at the bigger picture. How society, culture, and privilege create environments where toxic behaviors thrive. It's not just about the bad individuals, it's about the systems that reward them. So far, we've talked about narcissism, entitlement, and how they mess with our relationships. Now let's zoom out and ask a bigger question. Why does society keep handing us these broken mirrors in the first place? Listen, the truth is, our culture and systems don't just tolerate narcissism and entitlement, they often encourage them. It's like we're running a workshop on how to crack mirrors and handing out awards to the best participants. Here's the deal. Our society's created a perfect environment for narcissism to thrive. Social media, just as one example, is like fertilizer for narcissistic behaviors. Every like, every comment, every share is a tiny dopamine hit, reinforcing the idea that our value depends on external validation. It's not just a cracked mirror, it's a cracked mirror with a ring light and a filter. Think about it. Platforms like Instagram or TikTok encourage people to curate their lives, making everything look better than reality. The result? A culture where everyone's trying to outshine everyone else, often at the expense of authenticity and connection. But it's not just social media. Corporate culture rewards the same traits. Narcissists often rise to positions of power because they're confident, assertive, and willing to take risks, even when those risks come at the expense of others. Traits like empathy and humility don't always get you promoted. Instead, we see people rewarded for self-promotion, manipulation, and ruthless ambition. It's as if the corporate ladder is built out of broken mirrors. Now, don't get me wrong here. The vast majority of people who are in corporations, who are in businesses, they are hardworking, selfless, insightful people. And the reason why narcissists are getting ahead there is because they're fooling everybody into thinking they're like those guys. So while it's true narcissists will get ahead in those areas, in some cases, it's because they're mimicking the good guys. It's not that the world's being run by evil people. They're being run by people like you and me. But camouflage is camouflage. Now let's talk about privilege, because it plays a big role in enabling toxic behaviors. Narcissists with privilege often get a pass for their actions. Whether it's wealth, status, power, privilege acts like a shield, deflecting criticism and enabling entitlement. For example, imagine a wealthy executive who's used to having his personal chefs, assistants, and drivers. Over time, they start to see people as tools for their convenience rather than individuals with their own needs. This entitlement isn't always malicious. It's often just a byproduct of their environment, but it creates a toxic dynamic where their needs are automatically prioritized over everyone else's. Because these people often look polished and successful, we're less likely to call out their behavior. As as we see time and again, we tend to assume that someone with an Ivy League degree or a high-ranking job couldn't possibly be toxic. Those are the things that we value. It's like assuming a mirror with a fancy frame must be flawless until you to actually take a closer look. Now, I don't want to give the misimpression that people who are successful like this automatically we should be blacklisting. That's simply not the case. There are the vast majority of people who you might say is privileged is really taking responsibility and making the world a better place in the best way they can. Again, these sort of narcissists are using privilege as a camouflage. It's not that privilege creates this problem. So why does society keep rewarding narcissistic traits? Part of it is that some of these traits, like confidence and ambition, are genuinely useful in certain contexts. Like as I said before, a CEO who believes in their vision and takes bold risks might lead their company to success. The vast majority of us would call that being a hero. But the problem is when these traits come packaged with the sense of entitlement and lack of empathy and a dash of manipulation, as opposed to being embraced in the lens of responsibility. The other reason is cultural. As 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 we see time and again, traits like individualism and self-expression are deeply ingrained in Western culture. These values aren't inherently bad, but they can tip into narcissism where they're not balanced by community and accountability. The cultural normalization of narcissism also doesn't just harm individuals, it creates systemic dysfunction. When toxic behaviors are rewarded, they spread, turning workplaces, communities, families into battlegrounds of competition and exploitation. For example, when leaders exhibit narcissistic traits, it often trickles down to the people around them. We look up to them, we want to emulate them. Employees might feel undervalued, coworkers might become more competitive, and the overall environment becomes one of stress and distrust. It's like everyone's reflection in the mirror gets distorted by the person holding it. And let's not forget the impact on a broader social issues. A culture that rewards narcissism often prioritizes short-term gains over long-term well-being. Whether it's companies chasing quarterly profits at the expense of ethical practices or influencers promoting unrealistic lifestyles, the result is a society that's out of balance. It's not that being competitive or trying to earn a living or be successful is bad. Rather, it's that being out of harmony with these other values of responsibility and altruism that makes it a problem. Now, while we can't completely change society overnight, we can start by questioning the systems that reward narcissism. In workplaces, we can prioritize empathy and collaboration over individual achievement. In social media, we can focus less on likes and more on genuine connection. These small shifts might not fix every crack in that mirror, but they can help stop making new ones. Now, on a personal level, you can choose where you put your energy. Instead of idolizing people with flashy frames, look for those who reflect kindness, humility, and authenticity. The more you value those traits, the more, as a whole, we all encourage others to do the same. So, as we move to our next topic, the paradox of narcissism is both destructive and successful. Keep in mind that we all have the power to change what we value. By questioning the systems that shape us, we can start to see a clearer reflection, not just of ourselves, but of the world we want to build. So, we've talked about how narcissism cracks our personal mirrors and messes with our relationships. But here's a plot twist worthy of a Netflix drama. Those same cracks can actually help some people climb the ladder of success. It's like discovering that the broken mirror in your attic is actually a valuable antique, flaws and all. Let me ask you this. Have you ever wondered how someone who seems insufferable at a dinner party ends up being a CEO or a celebrity? It's not a coincidence. The traits we often associate with narcissism, grandiosity, entitlement, and lack of empathy, can be incredibly effective in certain professional environments. It's as if the corporate world hands out promotions for the best performance in self promotion. Narcissism appears to be associated with greater probability of financial and occupational success and a greater likelihood of fame. In other words, the very traits that make someone a nightmare to date might make them a dream to hire for certain jobs. Think about it. Narcissists are often confident and assertive. They're unafraid to take risks. They're the ones who walk into a room and act like they own the place, even if they just got there. In a competitive business environment, that kind of swagger can be mistaken for genuine leadership potential. And here's the kicker. While these traits might lead to professional success, they absolutely come at a cost. Narcissists tend to be terrible team players. They may take credit for others' work and they lack genuinely valuing their colleagues. They make decisions that benefit themselves over the organization. It's like they're polishing their side of the broken mirror while ignoring the shards falling on everyone else. So this is like a double-edged sword because this paradox creates a real problem. On the one hand, these traits can drive innovation and bold decision making. On the other hand, they foster a toxic work environment and unethical practices. It's a bit like using a cracked mirror to start a fire. It might work, but you risk burning the whole house down. Which really begs the question, are we really in a position to call it a disorder? If these traits are associated with narcissism, they actually help people achieve success, and society rewards people for it, is this really a pathology? Here's where the mirror shatters. While narcissists might thrive temporarily, and I'm talking short term, it's in certain professional settings, their personal relationships very much suffer. And over time, those same colleagues they stepped over, those same unethical practices, they come back to haunt these people. In the long term, it is a bad solution. These same traits that make them seem confident and decisive at work, outside of work, make them insensitive and manipulative at home. Remember Bernie Madoff? He was a financial wizard in public, but caused immense harm to his family and countless others. It's like they have two mirrors, one that shows a flattering, albeit cracked image to the world, and another that reflects their true self, flaws magnified in their personal life. Unfortunately, it's their friends and family who have to deal with the broken pieces first, and only later start to seep into their professional lives where everything falls apart. Again, Madoff didn't make off with all that money in the end. In the end, it all fell apart, even professionally. So why does society keep rewarding these traits? Part of it, like I've said, is our cultural emphasis on individual achievement and success. We equate confidence, mistakenly, with competence, and mistake arrogance for authority. There is absolutely nothing wrong with competence and authority. Those things are good. They organize our society, they drive innovation. However, at the same time, it is an ironic juxtaposition. Kids are being told that they need to wait their turn and be kind to others, all of which does fly in the face of what is considered the tools for success superficially in so many industries. In other words, we're teaching kids to be kind, but then celebrating people who bulldoze their way to the top. It's like telling someone to handle the mirror with care, but then applauding them when they smash it to get what they want. This paradox forces us to question how we define success and what traits we actually do value. If narcissistic behavior leads to professional achievement, although temporarily, and personal destruction, should, should we still consider these behaviors adaptive, useful, or aren't they just pathological? We need to dump the idea of the diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder and stick with the concept of narcissistic behavior and interpersonally toxic patterns. Instead of labeling a disorder, we should recognize it as maladaptive patterns that society mistakenly confuses for competency and real authority. Sometimes society rewards the wrong person. So, what's the takeaway here? We need to rethink how we define success and the traits we encourage. Confidence doesn't have to come with arrogance, and ambition doesn't require stepping on others. They're easily confusable, but they're absolutely different. It's possible to have a clear mirror that reflects both professional competency and personal integrity, and it's each individual's job to cultivate a sense of a sensitivity, really, to the difference between these two. On a personal level, we can choose role models who embody both success and empathy instead of idolizing the flashy executive who treats people poorly. Let's celebrate leaders who lift others up. After all, a mirror that only reflects oneself isn't nearly as valuable as one that helps others see their whole worth. The paradox of narcissism and success is a tricky one. It really challenges us to look beyond the surface and question the values that shape our society. It's like realizing that the antique mirror we've been admiring has really been distorting our reflection all along. As we move to our final topic, the challenges of treating narcissism, let's keep in mind that while we might not be able to change others, we can change how we respond and how we value certain behaviors, and how we need to be able to tell the difference between the real thing and the counterfeit. And by doing this, we might just start repairing those cracks in the mirror, one reflection at a time. Now, revisiting this metaphor of the mirror, a cracked mirror isn't entirely useless. In fact, it can be incredibly revealing if you know how to look at it. The cracks show us where the flaws are, where insecurity masquerades as confidence, where entitlement erodes connection, and where systems prop up behaviors that harm us all because of the confusion between competency and showing off. The beauty of understanding these cracks is that it helps us stop blaming ourselves for the distortion and start seeing the truth behind them. From our first discussion about narcissism and entitlement, we learned that these behaviors often stem from insecurity, a desperate attempt to fix a fractured self-image. Their mirror may look shiny, but behind the surface is someone struggling with deep cracks they don't want to face. As we moved into intergenerational responsibility, we saw these cracks aren't new. They've been handed down, not out of malice, but often out of a misguided attempt to protect the next generation. Recognizing this helps us to stop blaming others and instead take on responsibility, the thing no narcissist wants to do. Toxic relationships showed us what happens when we let those cracks spill into our interactions with others. They teach us the importance of setting boundaries and valuing ourselves enough to step away from people who reflect only negativity back at us. Our look at culture and systemic reflections revealed how society rewards behaviors that deepen these cracks, creating environments where narcissism thrives because of mistaking them for real, genuine values that ought to be held up as important. It also reminded us that we can choose what we celebrate and support, shifting the focus towards empathy, accountability, and responsibility. The paradox of pathology and success taught us that narcissistic traits can be both destructive and rewarding. Destructive in their purest form, rewarding when harnessed with real responsibility. Now, this really forces us to rethink how we define success and what we value in leaders, colleagues, and even ourselves. Finally, in discussing treatment challenges, we confronted the reality that not every crack can be fixed. But even so, we have the power to decide how these cracks impact us and whether we let them distort our own reflection. So, what do we do with all this? First of all, we start by being kinder to ourselves. If you've ever doubted your worth because of a toxic relationship or felt diminished by someone's entitlement, remember this. The cracks in their mirror are not your fault. You are not broken just because someone else's reflection made you feel that way. Second, we use this understanding to navigate our relationships and communities more thoughtfully. Look for mirrors that reflect back your strengths, not your insecurities. Be the kind of person who helps others see their best selves, not their worst. And finally, let's commit to challenging the systems that reward toxic behavior, whether it's in our workplaces, families, or broader culture. We can choose to value authenticity over grandiosity, empathy over entitlement, and connection over competition. And knowing the wrinkle there is sometimes authenticity, empathy, and connection are used as camouflages for narcissism. In fact, for narcissists, these things are their favorite piece of clothing to wear when they look at themselves in the mirror. And that our first impressions might actually be, well, that guy helps out a lot. That guy really seems genuine. That guy really does seem to value fairness and connection, when in fact, their words are covering over terrifying behaviors. Here's the thing. A cracked mirror can still reflect light. When we face the cracks instead of ignoring them, we start to see ourselves and others more clearly. We can stop chasing perfection and embrace the beauty in imperfection, the resilience it takes to hold together even when the surface isn't flawed. Let's use that awareness to heal what we can, protect what matters, and grow in ways that make us stronger. Because in the end, it's not about having a perfect mirror. It's about learning to love and live with the reflection that's staring back at you.